Journeys is your go-to podcast for all things creativity. I'm your co-host, Dave Petrosky, chair of the Communication, Media, and Screen Studies Department.
And I am your co-host, Melanie, Venezuelan designer and educator. This is the podcast about creativity, what it is in its many forms, and how we can become more creative in our everyday lives.
All right. So here we are, another episode of Creative Journeys.
Hello, everyone.
Hi. How you doing, Melanie?
Good. How are you, David?
Good. Quiet weekend, thankfully.
Same. I actually completely unplugged.
Yeah.
And did nothing but rest and binge watch a show on Hulu called The Great.
Oh, I love that show. It's so bizarre.
It is.
That was such a surprise to me. I still haven't watched the last season of it, but it is a favorite.
I should start it tomorrow.
It's good. It's good. So we have a great guest today. We're talking to Bill Farley from the Archaeology department. Or anthropology department. He's an archaeologist at Southern Connecticut State University. And so I don't butcher anything. I'm just going to let you speak for yourself. Tell us a little bit about yourself, Bill.
Sure. So my name's Bill Farley. I'm a professor at SCSU in the anthropology department, and I am an archaeologist by training, and primarily what I do, I mostly look at colonial history, especially in Connecticut, do kind of local backyard archaeology. So for those who maybe don't know, archaeology is the study of the human past usually through excavation, finding artifacts, archaeological sites, Indiana Jones stuff, except, maybe not quite like Indiana Jones. He's a little bit different, I guess. But he's
a little less adventure.
Exactly. And sort of for my day job, that's what I do. I do that kind of archaeology and obviously educate students here at Southern, especially those who are interested in going into a career in archaeology. And there's a whole industry called cultural resource management. Folks do that, and we do a lot of that here at Southern. And then I have a kind of after hours persona, which is probably what got me tapped to come and chat with you all, which is trying to do a little bit more public education and sort of science communication, particularly on places like YouTube and on social media, and sort of producing content that helps educate folks about that sort of thing. I think that's kind of the crux of it.
And that sounds so exciting. And I must confess, I think this is our first time meeting.
Mm-hmm, I think so.
Yeah.
You look super familiar. I know I've seen you guys around campus.
Same.
I know, but it is amazing. It's a big faculty here, and you can go years and never actually get to meet somebody. So it's always lovely.
That's true, even though we are a small community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we're right down the hall from each other. Our office is like right down the, right down the hall.
Exactly. Yeah. We get to hear all the musicians and
they're right across the hall from us. Well, you guys have I think a clarinet class or something going on there that I walked by, like right by your offices.
That's a new room this year. There's a room that it's not exactly soundproofed, but there's I don't know what they do, like performance in there. People go in there, sing, and they play. It's actually kind of cool. I think some people find it distracting. I find it neat because it's just, I don't know, some of that creativity.
It makes it seem alive, right?
It does.
It's very and we're across our office is right across from the experimental music, so they're doing beats and all that kind of stuff, and it's just we hear a lot of weird stuff, but then every once in a while they'll hit a groove and we're like, oh yeah, that's great.
I actually, when I went there the other day to drop off the flyers, there was a class happening and they had the door open. And I'm like, wait, I've never noticed that this happens right here.
Yeah. Oh, our previous secretary would just get really frustrated because, especially during busy times of the year, it seemed like they have the doors open when everybody was coming in for advising, and it just like, she was just so frustrated. It was terrible. So anyway, that's hallway sort of stuff. What there were so many things that I want to ask you about. I mean, am really interested in the archaeogaming.
Oh my God, me too. I really wanted to learn about that.
It's interesting. So let me. All right. Let me tell this as like a little bit of a story. That's probably the best way to do it. Right? This is creative. For
sure.
During the pandemic, isn't that how every story starts these days? During the pandemic, when we were all like struggling and we felt so distant from everybody, we felt so disconnected, we felt so teaching and educating felt hard because it was all online and we just didn't have those connections with students that we usually do. I was so depressed, right? Like we all were. And I was looking for any kind of an outlet. And so that's when I sort of started this little YouTube channel thing. And I was like, well, I loved watching long video essays, especially about video games, because I think video games are interesting. I've played them since I was a little kid, like lots of people do, but I've always been interested in them, not just as entertainment, but as pieces of art, as pieces of things that can be criticized from a scholarly perspective, whatever, right? There's something like books or movies that you can think about that way. And I thought, I'll try and make something like that. But I only really know about kind of two things, which is games and archaeology, right, which is obviously my discipline. So I thought, all right, I'll cram those two things together, and I'll try and look at video games through like an archaeological perspective, whatever that might mean. How is history represented in games? How do games represent archaeological subjects, archaeologists themselves, which are actually surprisingly common subjects in video games? And so I started this channel and I just started exploring that and getting interested in it. I thought I was very cool and very clever, like I'd invented this idea. And of course, that turned out that was not true. There was already existed as I started to do a little research into this and trying to, to get better educated about this topic I wanted to talk about. There was this whole thriving little sub-discipline called archaeogaming, which is the study of exactly that, this intersection of games and archaeology. And not just video games, tabletop games, board games, sports, just people bringing the kinds of ways we think about the world as archaeologists to that realm of like play, interactive play. And I met some really cool, amazing, smart people who are doing work in that field. And it's just this whole little discipline, mostly younger folks, a lot of early career people, a lot of graduate students who are doing this kind of work, though not exclusively. And I found that was very enriching to sort of learn more about that. And so since then, I've just been kind of engaged with that community whenever I can. I haven't really done a lot of traditional scholarship in that realm, though there are journals and things like that where people write journal articles like academics. Instead, I've mostly done this kind of public stuff. And over time, I've gotten more and more interested in, I found myself entangled in if you're doing science communication on the internet, especially in the last few years, and this is only going to become more and more important and prevalent, you're going to end up running into anti-science fields. And in archaeology, a huge one is conspiracy theories. So if you've ever heard of Ancient Aliens, you've ever heard of Ancient Apocalypse, the Graham Hancock show on Netflix, these are sort of conspiratorial frames of archaeology, and they're interlinked with much more obviously dangerous things, your sort of QAnons and your sort of electoral denialism and kind of real meaty politics type of things. And if you're making science communication, you get drawn into that. So now, more recently, this is way too long of an answer of your question. I'm so sorry.
Go for it.
I've been more and more interested in trying to look at those things at the same time. How does popular media feed into and kind of underpin and sometimes actually give people ideas that lead them into conspiratorial thinking? That's not to say that pop culture is bad, but that it plays a role in that, like all things do. And how can we as science communicators and scientists engage with that so that we can give people better ideas so that they can more critically consume fiction and entertainment and culture and not have it send them into these dangerous trajectories. So that gets a little bit heavy kind of quickly, but it is also, all these things are entangled in ways that I don't know exactly how to pull apart completely.
Right. Well, one of the things that I'm like really intrigued by is the idea that a lot of games and I do, I study tabletop games mainly. but video games as well, because I enjoy playing them as well. But one of the things that I'm really interested in is the way that the stories are created and the way that narratives evolve, and how they're able to do that and make us feel immersed in the world. And one of the ways that they do that is by providing, basically a history of how things evolved for these people, and that's sort of an underpinning of one of the classes that I teach that I reference almost every single episode. I teach a course called In a World, and we create a fictional world. And one of the things that I have the students do in the class is create a fictional history, backstories of what the cultures were like, and try to think about the cultures that preceded the one that they're currently writing about. And our showcase, which for those of you on campus will be on May 7th from 4 to 5 p.m. A little plug
Nice
there.
little plug.
Yeah, right. In the Communication, Media, and Screen Studies office. But what I have them do is create artifacts that are representative of the fiction that they've created. And we talk about, there's an article that I have that was produced by the Smithsonian that talks about like what we can, so it's like a crash course in archaeology without, getting into the really meat of what the discipline talks about, and it's very cursory, but it basically is trying to say, okay, we can learn a lot about objects, about their of the culture, about the people, the way that they lived, all those sorts of things. So I'm very interested in the way that those things get drawn into games, but also the way that influences our perspective on a lot of things. And I was just even thinking about, we were talking about right before we got on mic, the idea of like looking ourselves up on the internet and all that kind of stuff. And it reminded me, because my daughter had never seen Terminator. And we just watched it like 2 weeks ago together. And it had this whole thing with Sarah Connor like getting hunted by the Terminator, right? No big reveals. This is an old movie, so
Spoiler alert.
Yeah,
You
seriously.
can't do spoilers for the Terminator. What
But
is it,
yeah, right. Yeah,
87 or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. He's basically going through the phone book and looking at the next person on the list. But I was just thinking about like, well, we have this sort of digital footprint now that kind of gives us these sort of false leads about people. So if we're looking up ourselves, we get these sort of profiles that might be completely entangled with somebody else with the same name or whatever it might be. And I think that's something that we didn't necessarily have to, if we were going back like 20 years, that's not something that we ever had to even think about, right? But now it's making it possible for these things to get entangled in such complicated ways, and people read into it. They just start making their own connections and everything, and then saying, well, this is what it is. But I think so that's a little bit of a ranty kind of a thing, but I think it's very interesting that you're looking at it that way, because I think it's something that's extremely informative of the way that we can make sense of what's happening by looking into what exists, what's the past, and how we can do that in a purposeful way.
We should chat at some point, because that's the single thing I'd say in archaeogaming that I find most interesting. A lot of folks in the archaeogaming are writing about like representations of archaeological settings, whether or not they're historically accurate, whether or not they do a good job of portraying social issues, and I think that's all really valuable. But I think the thing I find most personally fascinating is kind of the same question: how do good games Think of a Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Zelda kind of game, or anything made by FromSoft for the video games nerds in the audience to know what I'm talking about. Those games are often good. People will say, what's good about those games? Well, they feel like they have a place. They feel like they have an identity. The world itself feels good and rich. But people often can't quite put their finger on why that might be. And it tends to be games that do a really good job of exactly this, right? Finding a way to create that simulacrum of history, that depth of time. And you can do that with historical documents, for sure, the way historians might review them. But oftentimes it's done more materially. It's done with the objects, the things in the world, where they're placed, the clothing characters wear, the architecture styles of buildings, all these little things that enrich our lives culturally in the real world and give us clues about where we are and who lives there and how long they've lived there and what their past is. You can put those things in the game, but you have that creative freedom to make it however you want. And that can be a key for sort of game developers who want to make games that feel good like that, to learn a little bit about history and archaeology and sociology and architecture, whatever, all these different fields that might give them some clues there. I find that sort of thing extremely fascinating. Actually, I teach a class now on campus too. It's special topics, but I'm going to turn it into a permanent course soon called Video Game Archaeology, which is kind of
That's awesome.
And it is. It's
Let me know
Yeah,
when you
yeah,
offer it.
Yeah. It sounds really kind of compared to that. We spend a lot of time talking about things like lore and paratext. So all when games have like huge wikis written around them and how that feeds the stories and the histories and the connections. So fascinating stuff.
That would be a great special topics where we're collaborating. So we have some designers, some communicators, and some archaeologists.
That would be pretty cool.
That would be really neat.
Something to think about.
Yeah.
Bill, I'm curious. I'm not a gaming nerd. My gaming stopped pretty much when the PlayStation came around.
That's a good time. That's a good time to get out of it.
But I did play a lot of Nintendo and a lot of Super Nintendo, a lot of Zelda, Link too. I remember when Link came out, playing a lot of that.
Oh, Zelda 2, Link, Link's Adventure, or whatever it is. That's a weird one. That's a weird one.
It was, but so entertaining. I wonder if you've ever, in your YouTube channel, because I didn't even know that you had a YouTube channel, have you talked about how the world of archaeology too has evolved from those gaming styles where it was a little bit more simple and you're just kind of like moving through these bushes that they don't really move, but they just kind of like open up to what you're talking about right now, which I recognize some of the names that you just mentioned. I don't know what they look like because I've never played that, but I do have students that are very passionate, and I have a husband who's also very passionate about this sort of like semi-reality games. And how also, so this is like a twofold question, and how also that could be used to motivate students at an early age to discover the world of archaeology too, rather than just, oh, let's go to the movies and this is what Indiana Jones is doing, or let's excavate this session. Like how do we put all of that together?
Well, I think, it is true, and sometimes I have talked about this on the channel, that the history of games is pretty important because you're right, 20, 30 years ago, games had to be much simpler in their graphics. They had much less space to tell that story, a lot less tools to tell that story. And yet they sometimes achieve that anyway, which is an impressive artistic achievement for sure, and creative achievement. And so Zelda is just a great, since that's one we've come back to a couple of times here. It's a good example to look at this for because it is a series that's been around for so long, kind of spans almost the whole history of video games themselves, at least going back to the 80s, for many, many decades now. And how newer Zelda games can use that incredibly larger amount of power and creative resources to tell a deeper story that somehow still feels like it's in that same place, and it somehow enriches the older games. You go back to Zelda 1 or 2 on the NES, or Link to the Past, or Ocarina of Time on the Nintendo 64. You go back to those older games, and they are influenced by your knowledge of those newer games and the ways those worlds interconnect. It's kind of a beautiful process of the whole enriching of that whole thing. And I do think that on the second part of that question of how do we use these things to kind of better educate about archaeology, there is a huge amount. Archaeology is interestingly, it's one of these disciplines that gets talked about in the public a lot, more than many other disciplines for some reason. It makes the front page of the New York Times when there's a big discovery. It's a thing people think they know a lot about or know a little bit about, and they probably do. But that also means there's tons of misinformation. There's lots of people who have just a kind of a picture of what archaeology is that's been painted by either media representations. Archaeologists love to get angry whenever anything is found. It'll say the headline's always "Archaeologists baffled by such and such." We're just constantly baffled by stuff. Constantly baffled by this new find will change history, and it rarely does. Right? It's usually much more complex than that. And media plays a part in that. Right? Indiana Jones, those movies are certainly the first thing most people think of when they think about archaeology, because Indiana Jones is an archaeologist, most famous archaeologist ever. And I love me some Indiana Jones, punching Nazis and solving crimes or whatever he's doing there. He doesn't ever really do any real archaeology, and that's okay. They're adventure flicks, but you can use people's love of Indiana Jones or of the Indiana Jones video games, which there have been many over the years, or whatever other game that they might like that has that sense of history, and you can draw them in. I've been finding it's a pretty small community doing science communication and archaeology, and I'm a pretty small fish in that pond. And I'm hoping that the thing that I can bring to the table that's a little different from much larger creators who are doing much more straightforward. Let's talk about this archaeological site. What makes it cool? What makes it special? It's wonderful content. I'm glad it's out there. But there's a lot of people who are blissfully unaware of archaeology, but they might love games, they might love books, they might love movies, and you can use that to kind of grab people's attention and say, look, here's how archaeology enriches this video game that you love, this film that you love. And so maybe you want to learn a little bit more about it, and then you can bring that critical thinking to other things you experience in the world.
Yeah, because I always think that if I could go back in time, I would still become a designer. But through a very brief period of my childhood, I wanted to be an archaeologist.
So you can still do it. It's never too late. You can take the field school this summer. Anthropology 305, learn how to do archaeology in the field.
But I didn't really have anyone around me that knew much or anything at all about the topic to encourage it. I also don't like the heat. So I don't do well when I'm outside too long in high temperatures.
The beauty is archaeology is everywhere.
But
so
I feel like,
if
I had someone talking to me like you're just talking about it right now, because like I can feel the passion just coming out of you. You're making me excited about learning more about archaeology. I wonder, if I had that experience as a younger individual, would I have maybe pushed a little bit more into going into archaeology field? And makes me think about like all this career fields, right? All these areas where kids may be interested, but there's nobody there to teach them about it.
It's hard with archaeology because you're not usually going to get that until college. So interestingly, I did not have any notions of being an archaeologist as a kid. I didn't even really know what archaeology was. I wanted to be a journalist when I went to college, so I dodged that bullet. I love journalism, but it's just tough field these days. A lot of them are, and I wanted to do journalism. I wanted to write. I knew I liked to write. I thought maybe I'd do history because that was my best subject in school. But I really was very much the eminent undecided student when I got to college. And I took an introduction to anthropology class my freshman year, which was taught by an archaeologist who was the state archaeologist for many years, who is an incredibly inspiring teacher. He's retired now, but he's just an inspiring teacher. And I don't know, 2-3 weeks into that class, I was like, this is what I want to do. I want to do what this guy does. I love this. And you're right. So it's just the value and importance of teachers. So many disciplines, though, we don't get in front of kids until it's so late in their lives that they might already be down paths and they might miss an opportunity to do something they might have loved more. So, places like YouTube and TikTok are places where you can maybe make that connection with a young person before they normally would get exposed to any discipline, right? That might be discussed.
Yeah, I think that I think there's two things that are going on there. I mean, one of the things that's sort of the obvious thing is that things like studying video games and studying games in general, because they're playful and that kind of thing, it's like, a hook. How do we pull them in and that kind of stuff? But then the other side of it is that this is actually like a part of our living culture, right? And that we're trying to understand this in a way that, like, why is this a multi-billion-dollar industry, right? Like, this doesn't happen out of nowhere, and there is some value in this just based on the economics of it, right? But when you start looking at what people are doing in particular games, and actually the games that I'm like most intrigued by are the ones that are doing the investigation and doing sort of sort of micro archaeological sort of thing. There's a tomb of Akarat. I can't remember what it is, but it's basically, sort of like an Indiana Jones style kind of a game. But basically, what you're trying to do is collect artifacts so that you have enough information to move on to the next phase of the game, right? And it's it's a very intriguing game, and I think that it's really cool. But I'm also thinking about like things like video games where, we had talked about virtual reality in a couple of episodes, and I haven't really experienced that. I don't game with VR at this point. Partly it's a nausea thing. I just can't.
I don't think I can handle it. I think I'd puke.
Yeah. It's like, yeah, it's terrible.
I think that's more for the younger, the Gen Zs, and the ones that are.
Yeah, I get motion sickness really easy with that. But certain games, like I'm thinking like, I don't know if you've played Shadow of Mordor or those. So in that, you're having battles and everything, but you also find artifacts, and then you have to like pick up the artifact and look at it and examine it to unlock the sort of backstory clip or movie clip that's so it's basically unlocking a memory or something like that. And it's a really great metaphor for how we can understand our culture better by looking at the things that are physically present, right? And how this kind of gives us sort of this enriched understanding of what not only what we're experiencing, but what other people have experienced, what were their lives like, and all those kinds of things. And I think that that's something that games are doing in a sort of a unique way, that sort of breathes life into it. And I think that that's where the power comes with kids, right? Or at least that's my opinion about it, is that it's actually showing them or unlocking their imagination for how they can understand the world in a different way.
Yeah.
Right. And it's not just that they're playing games, right? Because that's sort of like the default. Oh, they're playing games and that's going to hook them and we're going to pull them in and they're going to be in our major and all that kind of stuff. But that's not why I think we should be doing it. It's because these sort of modes of thinking and that are associated with games are about inquiry. They're about making connections, and just really trying to discover things about ourselves and the world. Right?
Creative problem solving, creative thinking.
Absolutely. Yeah. Right. And I think that's I'm so excited by the stuff that you're doing because of that. Because I think that it's really, and the direct connection between science communication and this is very very clear to me, at least, because this has been a major issue in our culture for years, and maybe it's always been, but certainly now we're actually starting to get a lot of pushback against science, and really studying the world and making sense of it, and then saying, well, this is all politically motivated or whatever it is, and it's like, well, it's what we see in data, or it's what we see in what we're discovering, right? How can we, and then it comes back into this kind of, I don't know, recursive sort of logic of, well, that's just subjective. There's certain things like if you can touch something, that's a very different than a spreadsheet of numbers or something like that.
Yeah, I've made that case a couple of times of why archaeology might be uniquely suited to this kind of science communication. There's something about archaeology that does speak to people. There's something about that tactile nature of it, that it is objective. Of course, right, we know that nothing is truly objective, right? And subjectivity is an element of just how we interact with the world as fallible human beings. But there is something about this idea of, well, a historical document is written by a person, right? They might bring their biases to that. Whereas archaeology deals with the stuff people leave behind, whether they want to or not. It's almost like being a detective or something, right? I was just thinking quite a lot recently about two video games. We use some games as examples. One of them is a game called Outer Wilds, which I did a video about, which is an excellent kind of an archaeology game in a way that many games aren't. But it's a sci-fi game. You play as like a weird alien creature in a little bespoke galaxy. It's not our world at all. But effectively, the gameplay of the game is doing archaeology. You fly around and you look for artifacts and places and sites about this sort of ancient culture in that world, because you're trying to solve a problem that's going to basically kill everybody, and you need to, whatever. You don't need to get into the details of the plot, but it is you're essentially acting as an archaeologist, and it's the closest I've experienced to recreating how archaeology really works. How the clues you get are not always, and are actually almost never, just tell you the story, right? You have to do interpretation. You have to make connections across time and space to really answer any big questions. And the second actually is the game L.A. Noire, which is a.
I haven't played that one.
Yeah,
I have played Outer Wilds, but not L.A.
That's a Rockstar game from 2000. Yeah. Something like that, and it is a game where you literally play an LA detective in the 1940s. It's a noir game, and it's about finding clues and interrogating people. And again, it's somehow, it just reminds me of, you're watching as the game goes, and the character is picking things up, and he's looking at them, he's rotating them, and he's trying to think about how that connects to a note you found 2 hours ago, something somebody said 3 hours ago. Archaeology can kind of give us these tools that can really help enrich our critical thinking. But I liked what you said too about games. Excuse me. Games are kind of simultaneously culture themselves. They are obviously culture, right? They are this huge industry, but they just are. They're an artistic output, right? There are little games made by passionate individuals that'll be played by 5 people. There are massive games made by thousands of people that are meant to make billions of dollars or many hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever. And everything in between. They're just like any other art form. But then they also, because they are experiential, because we can move through them and interact with the world in a unique way that's different from something we could do in passive media like books or movies. And I think this is true again for like tabletop games. And I mean, I personally love sort of tabletop role-playing games, your sort of Dungeons and Dragons kind of stuff, that active creativity and hitting a lot of those same notes. I'm getting all over the place here, but it's I guess there's a point I'm trying to make. I don't know. It's a great. Right. We're in a creative endeavor on its own. So they are culture, but they also can kind of invent their own cultures as a simulation of how we understand culture and experience culture and study culture and move through it. So you simultaneously are experiencing a cultural object and learning how to engage with culture in the real world, your own culture and other cultures that might seem totally different from yours, cultures from the past that might as well be a foreign country, as that famous saying goes. And yeah, that's why I'm sort of fascinated by them.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I mean, there's, looking at like game studies and that sort of thing, just looking at how games are, sort of snapshots of the cultural moment that where the game was created. right? So you have some board games that have gotten some criticism, especially in the last 10 years or so, because of a much more broad cultural awareness, right? And the implications of things. So you see games like I think Puerto Rico is a board game that kind of has uh, you know the colonization of Puerto Rico, basically, and basically the one of the commodities in the game. I believe, I've never played the game, but I've read a couple of papers about it and that sort of thing. But one of the commodities is slaves, right? And you're basically dealing in ostensibly slave trade in the colonization of the and I could be misreading the because again, it's not a firsthand, because I haven't played the game, so I might be misreading the rules. So, folks probably fact check me on that or something like that. But the basic idea is that at that point, people were just trying to create a game that was reflective of the dynamics at a particular moment, but not being culturally sensitive to what the implications of the game and the game system say about how we're dealing with that issue, right? So basically, sort of treating real people, or people in that context, as a token or a tradable good, is in dehumanizing, and not only that, but just has like tremendous implications for how we're thinking about how we deal with one another as human beings, and power dynamics, and just all of the trappings that go along with colonization, and that sort of thing, which can be really difficult, and problematic in so many different ways. And again, I'm going the same route as you, which is, what was my point? But I think that's I think it's an important thing to kind of recognize those that the games themselves are a representation of where we are at a particular time, and that's one of the things that I'm also very interested in. And I'm interested in, like you had mentioned, Dungeons and Dragons and that sort of thing. I'm interested in the places where we're using our imagination in the moment to create something, because isn't that revealing something about how we see the world in some way, or what we value, or the things that we find intriguing or exciting. And we might be enacting certain things in certain ways in those, sort of free form games that sort of reinforce our worldview, or maybe contradict. And that's one of the things that's great about role playing games, is that you can break out of what your reality is and try to deal with some of the larger social issues that are, sort of confining us in reality, so to speak.
Yeah, I mean, I'm participating in a tabletop sort of campaign right now with some close friends, and a couple of whom were actually my former students here at Southern. And it takes place in a sort of bespoke world. It's not it's a fantasy world, but time and time again we're finding, right, it's that collaborative, creative process of creating a world, which is, so anybody who's ever played tabletop games probably knows, is kind of a magical experience, right? Where you have the person who's the kind of leader, your DM type person, who has a certain amount of authority, but often, at least the ones that are good, are share that authority, that authorship of the world with all of the players. And you do find it time and time again that everybody brings with them to the table ideas they want to explore, and they're always influenced by the real world, politics, history, the things people know about from their own professions, their own scholarship, things they've read, or just character traits that they want to explore that are maybe different from themselves or even personal. I want to explore this flaw that I feel like I have, and it's like a safe place to do that. It can be such a powerful space to do that. And in doing that, you end up creating a world that again has that magical that verisimilitude, to use a fun cocktail party word, that sense of realness that comes from all of that. And I think you were mentioning in the Puerto Rico, there's a lot of video games that have similar kinds of criticisms about them that have been talked about for ages. All of the so-called 4X games, or a game like Civilization, and these are games that are about moving through history, and they oftentimes deal with quite intense topics that are part of real history, and that becomes a complicated question about how you critique that, because it says, are we going to just sort of pretend like something like slavery didn't happen in this fantasy world? Is that really doing us a service? But if a game wants to include slavery as a mechanic, that needs to be done in a really thoughtful way. Otherwise, yes, it's just going to become a form of dehumanization. It's just going to lessen people's ability to humanize and connect with these actual people who were mistreated in that way. And that can be quite challenging. I don't know too many games that have done that well, but a lot of games have tried. So
Yeah, that's true.
I think it comes down to cultural background as well. And I can't imagine somebody designing a game that is going to be wonderful and agreeable for everyone, right? Because that type of game, maybe somebody in Latin America or in Europe, I don't even know, may not see it as a serious topic. They may see it more like, oh, this is fantasy because we don't have this culture and we don't have this background, right? But if we get someone from the US, right, where we're still dealing with our history and our past, that is going to affect that person. And that is going to hit in a little bit more personal. So, I don't know what the answer of the solution is. Now all three of us are going into different directions.
Right. But I think that part of it is like if you look at what people are doing in independent games, right? So there's a lot of independent role playing games that are raising these kinds of questions, and they're like coming up with their own games and game mechanics that kind of look at a serious social issue, and that's what the game is about. Like it's about dealing with that one particular social issue, right? And it becomes focused. And these are, it'll be like an intense role playing game, but it'll only be like for a 2-hour, 3-hour game setting, like as opposed to a Dungeons and Dragons, which can go on for years, right? If you let it. I think that idea of the using games as a sense-making apparatus or a way of dealing with problems, I think is a really interesting thing. And I think that, it goes back to where we started with just talking about archaeogaming and that kind of thing, is that, this is basically trying to help us to, reveal the way that these sort of things, these story apparatuses or whatever it is, that these can help us to understand better what's going on or what happened, and come to terms with the challenges that people were having in a particular moment, and maybe better situate ourselves in trying to problem solve for contemporary time. Right. And I think that that's where the richness comes into play. And so, I mean, I'm so excited to talk about this because I don't get to talk about it a lot. And they say, it's like, kindred spirit, we get to talk about it.
I may just move to the side.
No.
And let you two
you need
just
to have,
get into it.
You need to have somebody who's not invested to keep it all on the plane.
No, that's absolutely right. That's it. But because I mean that's the whole thing. If it's and this has been a problem that I've had, just thinking about games, because I was trying to do some of my own game development and that kind of thing, and I really tried to figure out like, who am I making these games for? And it really became like, I'm making these games for me, and people that are exactly my profile, right? And that's not what I want these games, that's not what I want to get out of games. I want to make it so that a game, if I do make a game, that it's going to be something that's extensible to a lot of other people and that they're going to be able to use it to make sense of
So
things.
what you're saying is that game making and tabletop games and everything follows a user-centered design approach.
Absolutely. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
And that is my plug for the day.
We got you back in. We got you back in. We find a way to keep us all. It's the class I was mentioning before. The final project for that class is I have the students do a game jam where they have to make a game,
Nice.
and it can be anything. It can be a digital game, so it can be something on Twine or something like that, or RPG Maker or something. But it can also be a board game, a tabletop game, a module for Dungeons and Dragons. It can be whatever they want, as long as they can bring it back.
Are you
to the
offering
thing.
that class anytime soon?
It's happening right now, but I will I think I'm gonna. This semester I want to submit it to get turned into a permanent course, and I think we're gonna try and put it in the LEP. Our department doesn't have any classes in tier 1. What's the one that's technology one?
Oh, tech fluency.
Tech
Yeah.
fluency.
Yeah.
So we were thinking we might stick it in there so that we can try and encourage. Because it's not really, thus far, it's only really been taken by anthropology majors because it's a special topics class, and it would be a great class to bring everybody in. It turned into more of like a games appreciation class.
I'm doing an independent study in the fall with 2 of my students, and they're making a game.
Oh,
Yeah.
That's awesome.
So I think they might be interested in talking with you. I'm going to connect you with them.
Yeah, I might try and offer it. I want to offer it once a year, so it'd either be in the fall or spring, probably once every year is the goal.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we definitely have to talk more about that because I'm really intrigued by what you're talking about, and I had a game that a course that I ran as a special topic about 2 years ago. That was communication, culture, and games. And that was, we had sort of a similar outcome for it, which was, to kind of think about like, okay, what kind of game would you make? And that was sort of their big project. But I would definitely like to compare notes and then like kind of see what kind of collaboration and things that we can
We
do.
don't have like a minor on this. We should like
Oh,
a
yeah.
minor in game studies.
I
I feel like
think so.
there's a lot of faculty all over campus who
Yeah.
are all individually doing stuff with this, and none of us know about each other. And it's probably
Yeah.
It's true.
No, I think it would be great, and if you look at sort of the indie game thing, industry, I guess you could say, it's very like mutually supportive, right?
Well, we
So-
are in a very supportive community here in New Haven
right.
for gaming.
Yes, that's true. That's true. There's absolutely, and not that I'm trying to plug any particular business or anything, but Elm City Games is good. Like,
I think we should interview them.
yeah. Oh, yeah, that's a
Yeah.
great idea. That's right. But they're
could try and do internships and try and kind of get people in the community and stuff like that.
yeah, oh, absolutely. But I think you're absolutely right that this is something that is gaining. I think it's gaining traction, but it's also gaining more acceptance in terms of the way that folks are looking at, and like that's why archaeo gaming is like so, because it helps to legitimize the other parts of game study that that I've been associated with, right? And I think that that's a really cool thing. And then if we can figure out like where these intersections interdisciplinarily are, then something like a minor or something would definitely make a lot of.
I definitely did not expect that our conversation will be about archaeo gaming.
I
This
don't know.
is wild to me.
I appreciated that. Oh, sorry, no, go ahead.
No. I'm just gonna say, like, I am definitely watching back this episode and gotta take notes because now I want to see and kind of like just look at the games that you both mentioned and look at those little details, because now I'm gonna look at this game from a different perspective.
Yeah. We we could probably just have a couple of episodes where we're just talking about like all the different dynamics in games that I would just that's food for thought. food for thought. We're kind of running out of time.
Yes, but before we leave, Bill, I do want to ask you, because we do sort of like end our episodes in the same way when we try to give advice to students, if we have any student listeners. And you mentioned you didn't really discover archaeology until college. So is there anything that you want to give back to the students right now? Any type of wisdom or encouragement?
I would say if you find yourself interested in something here at school, maybe you take an Ant 205 or Introduction to Archaeology class, and you think, boy, that sounds kind of interesting. Talk to somebody about. But you might kind of go, wow, that sounds so esoteric, so academic. Could I make a career in that? Could I really do that? Make sure you have that conversation with somebody, a faculty member that you trust, or whoever taught that class that got you inspired. And I mean this for truly any class on campus. If something grabs your passion or gives you that feeling of passion, talk to them about it, because you might be surprised that there are ways to make a career, that there's actually an industry in that. I mentioned before, archaeology actually has, most archaeologists work in an industry that's supported by federal laws, and it's a little bit like environmental studies. It's a similar kind of industry to that. But there's also lots of other ways you can get involved in archaeology, and I'll bet that's true for anything. You take an art class, you take a design class, you take a geology class, I don't know, whatever it is, and you're just really into rocks. You just get so excited about rocks, talk to somebody and see how you can try and make that something you do. And then maybe even if you don't end up pursuing it as a career, you might find a way to keep that a part of your life, right? Part of this, I think that this podcast is talking about creativity, and certainly for me, creativity is a way of like enriching my life outside of work too, right? I like to draw, I like to paint, I like to make little videos, I like to play around with audio editing, whatever. I make games sometimes. I kind of anything I can think of that's I always want that sort of creative output. And so many of the skills that I bring to those creative outputs might come from classes I took in college or in high school, or things I learned from teachers that I really admire that I didn't end up pursuing as a career, but they've enriched my life. And that is incredibly valuable to me, right? Life is about more than just dollars and cents. Yes, you got to put food on the table. Yes, you got to pay your rent. You also need to live. You need to make art. You need to consume art. You need to feel like a human being. And so I would say, when you feel something bring you that passion, find a way to make that a part of your life, whether it ends up being part of your careir or not. Find a way to kind of keep it, to hold on to it.
I love that.
That's
Perfect
great.
ending.
Perfect ending. Perfect ending. So we're still looking for emails from folks if they have suggestions for show topics and that sort of thing. So you can reach us at creativejpodcast.gmail.com, and that's our show for this week.
Thank you, Bill, so much for
thank
coming
you, Bill.
and chatting
This was
with us.
a great conversation.
Yes,
I want to talk to you more.
Yes, absolutely. We'll get chatting, and keep an eye out for that mine or something.
Creative Journeys is a podcast produced at Southern Connecticut State University by faculty, students, and staff who are interested in exploring our creative potential.